Ready for a deep dive into a tough but important topic. Today, we're going behind the walls of Spanish prisons. The reality is, Spain has the fourth highest suicide rate in European prisons. And we're going beyond the statistics with this one. We're lucky enough to have an article by Paloma Ucele. She's a jurist who's been working inside the system, seeing this firsthand for over a decade.
Yeah, what's powerful about Usali's perspective is she's not just presenting a problem, right? She's offering solutions based on what she's seeing every day.
Yeah.
And that's what makes this deep dive so important. It's one thing to read a headline about prison suicide. It's another to really understand the why, the how, and what can be done.
Absolutely. And she doesn't sugarcoat anything. The article really lays it bare. The suicide rate in Spanish prisons is 20 times higher than the general population. And what's even more heartbreaking is this risk, it's even higher for pretrial detainees, people who haven't even been convicted yet.
It makes you think, right? The psychological impact of that. Suddenly, your freedom's gone, support system ripped away, no idea what the future holds. As Usali points out, it's this drastic change on top of the stress of legal proceedings that creates this breeding ground for despair.
It makes you question the whole idea of pretrial detention, especially if it's pushing people to this point. It's like this terrible mix of isolation, uncertainty, just constant fear. Usale mentions that the prison system tries to address this, like with a buddy system, pairing new inmates with others, to prevent them being completely isolated.
Trying to build a little sense of community in a system that's inherently dehumanizing, right?
Ah.
But even that system, as Usale reveals, has its cracks. There's this chilling anecdote in the article, an inmate who takes his own life while his assigned buddy, the person who's supposed to be looking out for him, is at a court hearing.
It really drives home the point that even when the system tries to provide support, the potential for tragedy is always there. But it's not just the initial shock of being imprisoned that creates this risk. Usali points to another critical time, kind of surprising. It's the period leading up to release. You'd think that'd be a happy time, but the article suggests it can be just as, if not more, destabilizing.
Yeah, it's like this weird contradiction, right? You're getting out, that should be good news, but there's this underlying fear of what's next. What is it about this period, this lead up to release, that's so dangerous? Well, the article really digs into this idea of just how hard it is to reintegrate after sometimes years locked away. Think about it. The world keeps spinning outside those prison walls.
Huh.
But for those inside, it can feel like time has stood still. Relationships change, jobs disappear, society moves on.
So they're released into this world they don't even recognize anymore, even if it was once their home.
Exactly. And very often, they're carrying this stigma, right? Finding work is tough. Finding a place to live is tough, can feel impossible. And when you combine that struggle to reintegrate with everything else, the potential trauma of being incarcerated, it's a recipe for despair.
It's bleak, but Usale doesn't just leave us there. She talks about solutions like the Suicide Prevention Program, the PPS. They implemented it back in 2014. Can you tell us a bit about that program? Has it made a difference?
On paper, it sounds pretty good. I mean, they do psychological evaluations for those who seem most at risk. They've got the buddy system, like we talked about, and restrictions on things that could be used to harm themselves, obvious stuff.
Seems like a solid plan. But I'm guessing there's more to it than that.
Oh, there's always more to it. See, the article digs a little deeper and reveals some pretty big problems with how the PPS actually works in practice. One of the biggest things that jumps out is this reliance on internos de apoyo, basically, inmate support workers, to shoulder most of the burden of preventing suicide.
Hold on, so instead of having dedicated staff who are trained in mental health, they're relying on other prisoners to do it.
Yeah, pretty much. And you can imagine these internos de apoyo, they often don't have the right training, the resources, or even the emotional bandwidth to handle something as serious and sensitive as this. Put yourself in their shoes for a second. You're dealing with your own stuff. You're incarcerated too. And now you're responsible for stopping someone else from taking their own life.
Wow, it's setting everyone up to fail, putting an impossible burden on people who are already struggling.
Exactly. And the article is really honest about the toll this takes on these internos de apoyo. They see a lot of trauma, suicide attempts, even completed suicides, and it compounds their own psychological distress.
It's just wrong, ethically. The system's basically asking these inmates to take on the role of mental health professionals without the support, without the training. It's almost like they're being set up to fail.
It's a huge systemic issue. And we can't forget, this burden doesn't just fall on the inmates, right? Esley's article, it also talks about the impact this has on prison staff, something that often gets overlooked.
It's true. We don't often think about what the staff are going through.
And they're right there on the front lines every single day. They're the ones who see the despair firsthand, the mental breakdowns, the attempts, well, you know, it takes a toll.
It's easy to forget they're human, too. You can't just be exposed to that level of suffering day in and day out and not have it affect you.
No, you can't. And that's where Usali's article really struck a chord with me, because she talks about how there's often a real lack of support for these staff members. I mean, they're working in this incredibly demanding environment, emotionally draining, and they deserve so much better.
They do. So Isole doesn't just point out the problems. She actually offers solutions. What does she propose we do to make things better, to really address suicide in Spanish prisons?
Well, her big argument is that we need to stop relying so heavily on inmates themselves.
Hmm.
Instead, we need dedicated staff, people who are trained in mental health care, who can provide professional support. She really believes that's the key to actually getting to the root of this crisis, not just putting a Band-Aid on it.
Yeah, it seems obvious when you put it like that. I mean, you can't just expect prisoners to become mental health workers
Well,
overnight.
right. And it makes you think about the bigger picture of what prison is supposed to be. Are we just punishing people, or are we trying to rehabilitate them? If it's rehabilitation we're after, then addressing mental health, especially something as critical as suicide, well, that needs to be a top priority.
Makes you wonder what prisons could be. What if they were places of healing, of transformation, not just punishment? What if we really invested in the resources to support everyone inside, both inmates and staff?
It's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Hmm.
But that's what I love about Usali's work. It challenges us. It forces us to confront these really uncomfortable truths about the Spanish prison system. And more than that, it's a call to action. We need to do better. We have a responsibility to treat every human being with dignity, no matter their circumstances.
This has been a heavy one, but so important. It's easy to look away from these issues, pretend they don't exist. But the truth is, how we treat those who are incarcerated, it says a lot about us, about our values as a society. Let's choose to engage, to have these difficult conversations, and most importantly, to advocate for change. Because as we've heard today, there are human lives at stake.